Okay, Lane, you're right before Becky. How you doing? From
Hi there.
Bismarck, North Dakota.
I'm good. I'm good.
How can we
Thank
help?
you.
Yeah, sure.
I'm wondering how I can find out if I'm bipolar. That's what my husband thinks I am.
Okay, and what do you think, or why would he think that? What do you show him, or what does he see that makes him think that?
I'm depressed, maybe over anxious about some things and not anxious about others, or overwhelmed with things and I retreat. Is that anything?
Well, Sherry, why don't you start us off, and then we'll have Dr. Amon chime in here. What do you think, Sherry?
Well, what's interesting is those particular symptoms could be one of many different things. And I think because bipolarity has so much press out there, it's often the first thing that we think of if we see both anxiety or depression. Sometimes I notice with folks that have OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, because they're so anxious about so many things, they can also have depression, get worn out and kind of pull away. There's some people that have post-traumatic stress disorder that can be thinking about the things that hurt them and have a lot of anxiety over that. And then they also are depressed because of the hurt that they've experienced. So, is it bipolarity? Is it a regular cyclical thing? Do you notice, kind of like menses, I sometimes talk with people about, do you notice a cycle that's happening? And I'll just let Dr. Amon take it from there.
Okay, thank you.
So do you notice a cycle that's happening there, as Sherry is asking?
Well, PTSD.
PTSD?
I see myself in that. Yeah, right. I see myself in that category more so than the up and down of
bipolar. Then the up and down of bipolar.
Yeah, and so what is the source of the trauma that you're talking about?
Well, trying to retire, and we farm and ranch, and transitioning the farm and ranch over to children.
Okay.
It's a lot of stress. It's a lot of stress.
Yes.
Did you grow up, were there any hurts that you experienced as a young child or a young adult while you were living, working, growing up in your family, going to school, working on the farm?
Yes. Yes.
Can you give us maybe an idea of what that might be?
It would have been sexual abuse.
Oh. So sorry about that. That's a big one.
Yeah.
And so it's when we have sexual abuse, and especially if it's something we've not really ever gotten some deeper treatment for, it just keeps peeking its head up in the form of anxiety or fear or sadness over time. Have you ever thought of doing some deeper counseling around that?
Yes, excuse me. I have done that, and the problem that arose in the very first part of that was I did not tell my husband before we got married that I had that abuse in my childhood or my adult, in my teens.
Right.
And what was his response when you told him?
He's still very angry about it, and he's the kind of person that he does not trust me. He thinks I have affairs and that type of thing. He conjures up. If I'm out in the garage and it's dark, he thinks I'm hiding something, that kind of thing, or if my body is bruised.
Okay, well,
he can,
I am
know,
so sorry that you're having to live like that. Let's see what Dr. Amon thinks about all of this. Dr. Amon, what are you thinking there?
all right. Thank you.
Well, it's complicated. And I mean, obviously, as far as the bipolar question, I'm not hearing that. I'm hearing a whole bunch of other things, trauma,
Right.
Chronic stress in your relationship. I wonder what's going on with your husband's brain. When you think of bipolar, it's the word, right? You go between two poles. That you might have lots of periods of time when you're normal, periods of time when you're depressed, sad, blue, negative, can't get out of bed, maybe even suicidal thoughts or suicidal behaviors. And then you cycle into up times. So that's the other pole, where you don't really need to sleep, your thoughts go fast, you can become hypersexual, hyper-religious, really impulsive, spend money that you don't have, and then even without treatment, you can cycle back to normal or cycle into a depression. And so, one of the questions I'd ask you is, have you ever been in a manic phase that lasted more than a week or two? Often gets confused with ADD because they cycle 6 or 7 times a day, right? They can be really up and down, or traumatic brain injury can go with a lot of mood instability. So, Lane, have you ever had what you would describe as a manic episode?
No, not really. I basically am anxious about how can I fix myself, or how, when the other person is accusing you of things, how can you get over that hump and
so sometimes
have them see that. Oh, go ahead.
Have them see that what?
Have them see that you're not as bad as they think you are.
Yeah, and I'm going to go in one other direction here, just based on what you've just told us, Lane. So sometimes with sexual abuse survivors, kind of like Dr. Amon mentioned, sexual abuse survivors can either be hyposexual, meaning they shut down because of the wounds, or hypersexual. But many that I've worked with are hyposexual. And that might impact the relationship in their marriage. Well, sometimes husbands get angry and they take that trauma that you've experienced into their own hands. And they start looking at pornography, maybe trying to meet their own sexual needs. But what happens is something kind of sneaky. It's called projection. Instead of them telling you that that's something that they're doing, they start projecting it onto you. I think it's very odd that your husband said that he can't trust you, and he thinks when you go into the garage, you're hiding something. And, if you're bruised, there's something that you've done. It's like he's conjuring up things in his mind, but projecting them on you. And that's not okay, because I consider it's called gaslighting. Gaslighting is when you're doing something, you have a bad behavior, and you're doing something, you're trying to hide it, but you actually put it on your spouse instead of taking ownership of it.
Okay, we're going to go to a break. We'll give you some more help right after this. If you're a man and you're married and your wife couldn't tell you about abuse she had before you were married, to pile on more shame, well, what a horrible thing to do, rather than try to understand yourself. Why wasn't I safe enough to hear it? We're back. Steve Arterburn here, and as I have heard this call from Lane, and I am going to ask Dr. Amon to comment on it, but this is the kind of thing that would really benefit from a workshop we've got coming up called the Emotional Freedom Workshop. It's not everything, but it is a big, giant step in the right direction. And if you've got some past that keeps dragging you down or creeping into the future and the present, emotional freedom would be a great, great thing for you to look into, and you just have to call us at 1-800-NEW-LIFE. Well, Dr. Amon, as you've heard this sad story of Lane and all that, and the husband's reaction and all this, any final words for her?
Steve, I think I have a book coming out March 2nd called Your Brain is Always Listening. Tame the hidden dragons that control your happiness, habits, and hang-ups. And I was just thinking about the dragons from Lane's past, the wounded dragon. There's 13 dragons from the past, the anxious dragons, the abandoned, invisible, and insignificant dragons, the hopeless and helpless dragons. I'm hearing all of them. It's sort of like a dragon herd is called a thunder. I'm hearing all these dragons. So getting the help she needs from an objective third party therapy is just absolutely critical. And, when someone else goes bipolar, you should always think about it and then get it assessed. It's not what it sounds like to me. It sounds like past emotional trauma mixed with chronic stress, mixed with relationship issues. But, somebody should talk to the husband and go, when you say that, tell me what you're seeing. Because often people who have bipolar disorder don't see it in themselves. So I think a thorough assessment and good treatment could just be so helpful.
Okay. Well, let me send you, what do you think? I'll send Sherry's book.
Yeah, probably Intimate Deception.
But what book could I send her from you that you think would be the best, Dr. Amon?
Well, when you get Your Brain is Always Listening, but I think Conquer Worry and Anxiety would be a great book for her.
Okay. We'll get that out to her. And look forward to the book, Your Brain is Always Listening.